This is a special Cinco de Mayo edition, the council meeting for this year. And Viva Mexico, I guess is the way you get that. So I'll call the meeting to order. Madam Clerk, may we have a roll call, please?
Mayor Rick Mueller.
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Rachel Gray.
Present.
Councilmember William Benning.
Present.
Councilmember Gwen Calhoun.
Present.
Councilmember Carolyn Humphrey.
Present.
Councilmember Sarah Pacheco. Councilmember Christine Wolf.
Present.
Mayor, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Mrs. Adams. We'll now move to item number 1, acceptance of the agenda. Mrs. Humphrey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move that the agenda for the special city council meeting of May 5th, 2020 be approved as written.
I second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion, additions, corrections, etc.? Hearing none, I'll call for the question. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It's unanimous. We next go to the item 2 is a public hearing item. And we don't need a motion for this. So I would ask Mr. McLaughlin if you're ready to do your presentation.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, members of council. How's my volume?
A little louder, please.
A little louder, please.
A little louder. Okay, let me try to adjust the volume.
Yeah.
Master volume, how's that?
Everybody's okay.
Is that better?
Yes.
Okay, very good. I'll try to slow my roll because I've been told I talk fast. So if you need me to pump the brakes, just let me know. All right. So let me start off by saying, as you mentioned, this is a public hearing item only. No formal action is needed. We're simply seeking public comment and any further input you have before placing the proposed amendments into the public record for a 5-day review. The proposed amendments are to the city's 5-year consolidated plan and 2019 annual action plan. They are to implement the initial guidance we received during your April 21st work session. You'll recall that staff recommended that the CARES Act funding be allocated to provide emergency small grant business assistance and public services to those impacted by COVID-19 and who meet HUD requirements. At that time, there appeared to be a consensus on council to apportion, at least tentatively, the $159,897, with $100,000 going towards the small business grant program and the remainder towards basic social services. If you could go to the next slide, please. So I prepared an amendment summary on the proposed changes, which are highlighted in the document to facilitate your review. We limited the scope to just those changes necessary to program the CARES Act funds by adding an economic development goal with a program description and funding associated outcomes. And we did the same under public services. We publicized this meeting through an advertisement in the Herald. On April 24th, we submitted a waiver request to HUD to provide for expedited citizen participation procedures consistent with their initial guidance. However, yesterday I received word from our HUD rep that we needed to amend our citizen participation plan to include the waiver provisions. So those proposed amendments to the citizen participation plan have been added to your agenda backup, and we will place them with the substantial amendments for public comment during the 5-day public comment period that starts tomorrow through May 11th. Are you getting that distortion?
Yeah.
Yes, we are.
Okay, can that be fixed?
I don't know.
Or should I keep going?
Why don't you back up and get your last couple points and then go forward?
Okay. So I guess it was about a week and a half ago, we submitted a waiver to HUD consistent with their initial guidance to provide for expedited citizen participation procedures. And then there was a meeting at their headquarters, and yesterday they issued new guidance that in order to take advantage of those expedited procedures, we needed to simultaneously amend our citizen participation plan. So I wrote that up. It's posted with your agenda, and it will be placed in the public record along with the other amendments for comment over the next 5 days. And so I hope that came through okay.
Yes.
Okay, good. All right, so moving on. We will present any public comments that we received at your May 14th meeting, where we'll be requesting final approval and authorization to submit the amendments to HUD with the SF 424 form, which is our application for federal assistance. I don't yet have definitive timeline back from HUD on how long their review and approval time frame will extend. But given the purpose and urgency of the funding, I would think that we should have funding in place in less than a month from our submission date. I've been told just today from our HUD rep that we are first in line for this funding. He manages about 7 different entitlement communities throughout the state, and we're ahead of the curve. So we will be first in line for their review. Moving on to the next slide, Tony's going to.
Matt, before you go on, I want to bring something up with council, and this deals with timing. Matt and I've had some discussions about why this is taking so, and I won't use the expletives like I used with him, long to get done and in place. What I'm going to suggest is, rather than, and if nobody has objections, I'll direct staff to do it. I would like to not wait till the 14th of May. If we can do a special meeting and a work session on the 12th, which is past the 5 days that we need for public, then I think we can get this done and get it to the feds, so we can give them a couple more days to do whatever they need to do. And I don't know why they would need to do things, but obviously they do, to okay the program, so we can kick this thing off as soon as possible. Like waiting, we've already been with this for about 6 weeks since it came out from Congress. And as far as I know, HUD in the state probably doesn't have the money yet. Take a lot longer, but it's important that we're expeditious in getting this done so we can take care of our folks. Any thoughts on that idea?
I like that suggestion. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. I think I'm going to say what I think I was going to say. So I agree with you, and I agree with the mayor.
Right. Because I looked at that timeline, and we all know that these people needed the money yesterday. So anything we can do to speed it up, I am in favor of.
I agree.
And again,
Some recommendations for the priorities to be changed.
well, we're gonna talk about that. What I want to do is get the briefing done first.
Sounds good.
And then we're going to talk 2 issues. One is, are we still going to do both? And then the next question is, if the answer is yes, how do we split those out?
Roger.
You're coming up but let's get to, I just want to get this one thing done so we can give guidance to staff now that we want to do it on the 12th. And that still meets the 5 days of the public hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I agree with that.
That's the direction for staff. Now, Matt, if you don't mind, please continue your briefing.
Okay, actually, at this point, I'm going to hand it off to Tony. He'll provide some detail on how the Emergency Small Business Grant Program will be administered, what it'll cover, and subject to your input, of course. So with that, Tony, go ahead.
Okay. Mr. Mayor, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
All right. So we've been reviewing roughly 15 to 18 different communities and their processes. Mr. Mayor also had some guidance early on that you wanted us to find and look for a similar community as we worked it. So we found La Crosse, Wisconsin, which roughly has the same population in city as well as in county size. I've had a conversation, exchanged emails. So a lot of the products are based, in fact, off of La Crosse. I do want to thank them for their participation and sharing. So within the overview itself, we've talked before, really it goes back to keeping businesses open and retaining jobs. I want to be very clear that there are 2 categories, and we were very specific in choosing them. Because of the requirements of each of them, the inclusion of both gives us a greater flexibility to meet the business requirements. So
The business need?
Business needs, correct.
I got it.
So the micro enterprise itself is already in the community development block grant. Two primary requirements, 5 or less employees to include the owner. And the owner of the business must demonstrate that their income meets the low to moderate standards. And that's a couple slides in. So what would happen then if a business, for instance, the business owner does not meet that requirement? That's the inclusion of the special economic development grant. In this case, we picked 10 employees with the intent to focus on small companies within the community. We can change that. That's a flexible option. So we really wanted to focus at the small side. We do have a requirement.
So Tony, just make sure I understand. We can change what, the number of employees?
Correct. If we wanted to include businesses up to 15, LaCrosse included 75, just as an example.
Excuse me, Tony.
Yes, ma'am.
This is Gwen. Were there other categories that were considered before you decided on these two?
No, ma'am. And the simple answer is the micro enterprises in the community development block grant, and then they are categorizing the special economic development category as the second. So we have option A or option B or a little bit of both within this.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
The special economic development allows us to include an employer that will maintain 1 or 2 employees at the low to moderate income level. I know there was some talk about that before. So to put this in perspective, the micro enterprise would have no requirement to come back to us and confirm that they maintained a job. The special economic development side will, because the federal law requires that element. So that's why you see, and we kind of set it aside as 1 job per 5,000. So if the grant was up to 10,000, they would confirm 2 jobs. The other thing I want to be very clear on this is the current state of their business. For instance, if the business was 10 employees in February and they have already laid off 5 employees and they're trying to maintain those 5, they may meet the standard for the micro enterprise. So it is the current environment of the business, not what it was before.
Hey, Tony, this is William. One thing I'm running into from talking to some business owners that are trying to file unemployment, and I don't know if this will relate. If they didn't pay themselves a salary and they just took money from the profits, if there were any at the end of the month or the end of the week, whatever it may be, how can they prove their income level low to medium?
Councilmember.
If I may, Tony, I'm sorry, but I'm not sure how that has to do, but you would prove it off your tax records.
Correct.
That's what I thought also, but unemployment is not, they won't let them do that right now.
I'm not talking about unemployment.
This is not
No,
employment.
So my question is, are we going to do the same thing for this? Because unemployment is not doing it for them to file now, while others, if they pay themselves a salary, can. I just want to make sure, like a business has 1 owner, 1 worker, but they don't pay themselves a salary. How can they prove they have that worker?
Tax record.
Okay, I just want to make sure because unemployment's not taking tax records.
No,
Tony, do you want to answer that question, please?
yeah, Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Benning, the short answer is the redacted 1040.
Okay. That'll work.
So in the lower right, we just kind of gave you some options. If we averaged out $3,000 a business, we could touch 33 businesses or 10 businesses at $10,000, just to kind of give you a frame using the $100,000 in planning. And then really more of a question as we move forward, we've got the option to put a preference for the micro enterprise. So we could stack the businesses that are 5 and under and meet the low to moderate income in the front of this. So just something to consider kind of as we move forward.
Tony, excuse the interruption again. Do you have a list or any way of showing how many of those businesses exist? 5 businesses with 5 or less employees, or businesses with up to 10 employees? Do you have a record of that?
Councilmember Calhoun, we've got a ballpark on the size of the companies. What I do not have is their financial state. So I don't know where their income levels are at. So that's kind of the trick in this one.
I see.
Tony,
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Oh, good. Are you finished? Have another
Please,
question?
please address, please, we're getting some problems here, so please address your questions to the chair. Who would like to go next?
Mr. Mayor, this is Sarah.
Okay, Sarah,
Councilmember
welcome.
Pacheco.
Tony, you have a question from Sarah.
Thank you. Just for clarification for me, when we're talking about employees or meeting the low to moderate income standards, we're talking about the pay level of the employees of the business meeting the low to moderate income standards.
Councilmember Pacheco, yes. Flip.
Okay.
I'll talk about the specific numbers in 2 slides.
Okay, thank you. Sorry.
Anybody else on this slide?
Mr. Mayor, it's Councilman Benny.
Go.
Just real quick, the bottom right, Tony, that's our perceived how much we want to give away, 33 businesses or the 10? Or are you going to get into that more?
Again, it was just a ballpark. So we had a discussion. Again, just a quick math. If we do an average of 3,000 and we're working with 100,000, so we can spread it out thinner or we can go larger depending on how this thing moves forward.
Okay.
And anybody else before I make a comment?
No, I'll reserve all my comments till he finishes. Thank you.
Okay, I just have one comment. When we're talking about businesses, there's an application process. And really what we need to do is make sure we're fair if we're going to do both of these. And I think it's recommended we probably try both of them. The first qualified should be the first served. And we should have it, we'll have a date when we open applications, obviously. So the first ones are qualified and we keep doing it until the money runs out. Am I off base there, Tony?
Mr. Mayor, we included, well, in the timeline, we used a 2-week window for all the applications. And what La Crosse found was they had more applications than they had money.
That's what's going to happen.
And at that point, instead of, for instance, if we use the 7,500 and the 10,000, maybe we meet it in the middle and the max requirement would be 5,000. So the intent, and I'll talk a couple slides in with the criteria, was to find the best businesses, the most needing, and then give us the flexibility to adapt, as opposed to the PPP program where it was the first one in with an application got the money, and if you got in late, you got nothing.
Got it. Okay. Anybody else on this slide? Go ahead, Tony.
All right, Mr. Mayor, in this one, again, we set kind of the ceilings for the micro enterprise up to 7,500 and $10,000 for the special economic development. And again, the intent of the application is they will tell us where they're spending it and what they're requesting the money for. So again, that's just the ceiling. Again, we've talked about there won't be a requirement to keep the job on the micro enterprise side, but there will be a certification that they did in fact keep, up to 2 jobs to meet the requirements of the special economic development grant. You'll see the type of business. Again, we're looking at for-profit, commercially district locations, locally owned and independently operated, and then the impact of COVID-19 and or the government ordered closures. And that's part of the application process as they explain the circumstances and what the last 6 to 8 weeks in the pandemic has meant to their specific business.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry, Tony, did you say we have to specifically focus on those types of businesses, or we are choosing? Why are we specifically focusing on those, on restaurants, bars? Because I feel like there's probably people being left out, right, that were affected that aren't on the list.
Well, Councilmember Humphrey, yes. I mean, we've got some latitude to move this. And again, with $100,000, again, I've looked at, 15 or 18 communities. Most of them were focused on the things that were impacted. So the restaurants, bars, small retail has been closed, as well as services have been impacted. So that's kind of, again, that's the line in the businesses that we've drawn. But we do have some flexibility.
And Tony, my understanding from the federal documents, it has to be a for-profit group. And it has to be locally or independently owned, we can't do chain stores, etc. Is that right?
Correct, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Mayor.
I-
Mr. Mayor. Gwen.
I think we got William first.
No, go ahead, Miss Gwen. I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor. I'll go second.
Ms. Gwen.
That's okay. Never mind. That's all right.
Hey,
Okay, well, you're up.
thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to, I kind of going back on what Councilwoman Humphries has said. I like maybe putting services first because restaurants had the ability to stay open even though they were diminished. Some of the services like our hair salons, barbershops, they had to shut down completely and didn't have the capability to deliver food. So I want to make sure we stay well-rounded and not have places that were able to generate income and generate money and keep their employees, whether it was more difficult than those that had to shut down completely.
Councilman Benning, that's a great comment. I think if we wait a little bit and we're going to talk about how things are going to be evaluated and competitive selection criteria, once we get in those, I think that's the appropriate spot for your comments.
Roger, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Tony?
All right, Mr. Mayor, we'll go to the next slide. And I knew there were questions, so this is really just a reference document. And again, it goes back to, if you look at the lower column, the 80% income limits, starting with 33,550 on the left for one person in the family, moving up to 63,250. So as we put the criteria on the micro enterprise, that is the number that will apply to the business owner. As you move into the special economic development grant, that will be applied to the employees and the jobs in which they are guaranteed that they will keep. Is that clear?
Roger.
So again, it goes back to the earlier discussion. It will link to their individual 1040s and link to how many persons are in each family. So it will, and sliding scale based on the number of folks in each family.
Any other questions? Tony?
All right. Mr. Mayor, we'll move to the next slide. This is the criteria. And again, this is probably about a 90%, 80% solution from a couple of the other cities that we've tied in. So again, the intent was to be competitive and not first come, first serve. Matt and I've talked, we thought we could do better than the likes of the original PPP program. And it does offer us some flexibility to meet businesses where they're at. So again, running from the top, it's a 100-point scale. Really, the first one goes into experience in operating the business. For instance, a business that has operated for 20 plus years versus one that has been in business for 6 months. But again, it goes to their experience as they move out. The next one goes to their concept, and this is part of the application process. How are they clear about where they're going? And again, the timing of this will be linked in many cases to somewhat of the reopening. So it's kind of a bridge on the backside to reopen. The next one with the disease response, I think that goes to Councilmember Benning's point. How has COVID-19 impacted the business as they describe both their revenue and their sales? So that gets rolled up within that criteria.
Roger.
Job employment and retention, simply put, more is better. Generally speaking, more jobs. And again, those are full-time equivalents. So if they're mixing 4 or 5 different part-time employees, the intent would be 1 FTE positions defined as a 40-hour week. Again, the next one really falls into the community development block grant, where we're trying to target money. And if you look, it's minority and women-owned enterprises or business owners with low to moderate income. So those folks, again, and it's a 10-point plus or minus. You either meet the requirement or you don't. The last one really evaluates their application. What do they intend to spend the money on, and from a realistic perspective of their project and moving it forward. That will give us an opportunity with the intent to look at those applications competitively, do a staff review, and we may have the position, for instance, if you had 10 businesses all request $10,000, and the next thing we had applications 11 and 12, first come, first serve, 11 and 12 will not get serviced within that model. Within this one, we could round things down, for instance, just hypothetically take the numbers to 8,000 instead of 10 and service additional businesses. And again, talking to my counterpart in La Crosse, that's what happened. They had more applications and they actually moved things around. So they recommended the flexibility of this. So, Mr. Mayor, with that, I'll pause.
Well, I want to ask you a question here. Obviously, we're going to have to put out an application to folks, and they're going to have to fill out so that we know, especially in this business, whether they're, as an example, they're a minority or woman-owned business or low to moderate business qualification. That tells me we're going to have a group or a committee in the city that's going to peruse these applications and make a determination as to, 1 through whatever until all the money is spent. And there's no really addressing how that's going to be organized in your briefing, in my mind, at least not in detail. So you want to talk about that a little bit? Obviously, we'll advertise once we get this approved. We have to advertise it, and we accept applications, and then we have to have a committee, I guess, review and grade using this criteria sheet.
Correct, Mr. Mayor. So, and not to get ahead, again, that was just kind of the window on the timeline. So once the vote was taken, if in that case it was to the 12th, we could go live with the applications for 2 weeks. We've worked out with our IT department because again, you're talking even redacted 1040s have some sensitive information.
Yep.
So the business would fill out a simple 2-page self-certification, email it to Mike Klein or myself. We have the authority to build a folder in the secure side of SharePoint, send the link to the business owner with the application in the folder and the checklist of the other documents. They would upload those. In the time frame I gave us a week, again, I don't know if I'm dealing with 20 applications or 40, but I think in a couple of days we can independently score them, get together as a committee within the staff, and as you said, make a rank order determination of who meets the qualifications better than the other ones. So that's kind of that's the
And
big.
obviously, what I want to do is make sure we avoid doing getting a situation where Solomon would have to split the baby, if you know what I mean.
Right, Mr. Mayor, we've struggled with that because many communities have done very small amounts, such as $1,500. That's a lot of work for $1,500 to $2,000. So that's why I've talked to business owners, and we've talked to both chambers of commerce. I've talked to the EDF and the SBDC to try to come to let's give them a reasonable amount of money to bridge them out and make it worth the while to move forward. So while trying to hit as many businesses as we can in the community.
Okay, anybody else got any questions for Tony?
Mr. Mayor, I do.
William, go ahead.
So in your timeline, we're going to leave it open for 2 weeks, and then we're going to do a shotgun, look at them all, or you're going to look at them as they come in?
Now, the intent would be to have it open for 2 weeks, grade them all independently, and then again, come to terms with who is the best applicant or in most need.
Yeah, it really needs, you need to use the words, the ones of greatest need, because there's no best applicant. They're all in need, but we have to determine the greatest need. Any other discussion?
Mr. Mayor, this is
Go ahead,
Christine.
Christine.
Thank you. Tony, I know you said that you talked to everybody and I understand the amounts. I really do. I understand everything, probably more so than a lot of people on council right now. But I will say that don't underestimate even small amounts that can come through and what that means and how it can help.
I agree.
Everything is helpful, no doubt.
No, and Councilmember Wolf, that's kind of that's the thought to get all of the applications in, because maybe we make the decision to take it to $5,000, but we touch more businesses at the end of the day. So
I think that's fair. And I just want, my opinion is, I just want you to understand that even if it is just 5,000, that for some of these small businesses, that's huge. For me, I can say that covers my overhead for a month. I'm not applying, but I'm just giving an example. That would be huge. So I know they're small amounts, but even small things can be huge. That's all.
Good point.
Mhm.
Anybody else?
Am I good?
I can hear you.
Okay, good. So Tony, my question for you is, I understand that the selection criteria is set by HUD and it has to be done with those specific criteria. But do we have to use those weights, or did we come up with those weights ourselves, or
So,
how did we get to those?
okay, so Mayor Pro Tem Gray, the answer to the question is they want us to have grading criteria, but HUD does not specify. These were derived from other communities. And again, the same thing with the point structure. So we've got some flexibility to go left and right. But when HUD comes back and says, how did you spend the money and what criteria did you use? These are the ones that have already bounced to our HUD representative, but we do have some flexibility to adjust left or right.
The question I would ask on that is has the attorney reviewed those, had an opportunity to look at those to make sure there would be potential for us being criticized, sued, et cetera, to make sure we were being unfair or something based on unfair? Has he looked at it yet?
Mr. Mayor, I've had discussions. I haven't specifically run.
You need to sit down, take a couple minutes and have Nathan look at it and do that.
So if that's the case, then while you're talking to Nathan, if you could ask him if we could take out the minority women-owned business. I know that that's probably.
That's a federal requirement. Sorry.
Okay.
I already know the answer to that one.
Yeah, I do too, but just, hopeful thinking. But I would want to say if we could make that as low a point as possible, again, only because I don't want unfair advantages, because everyone is equally in need at this point.
I agree.
Well, I think 10 points when the lowest of all was 10 points is probably where it should be. That's my opinion. So.
Okay. And I would try to get it down to even just 1 to 5 if it were up to me.
Well, again, it doesn't need to be a 100-point scale either. But that's what we're being presented as a by staff, as a straw man. And I personally think what they've done here is pretty good overall, considering the lack of guidance we've received from HUD.
And I'm not surprised at all by the lack of guidance from HUD, unfortunately. Again, I mean, that's just my opinion, and that's what we're giving here is opinions. So I'm just giving my opinion is if we could even get that smaller, that would make me even happier. I'm fine with it, and I understand 10 is a low point in the grand scheme of things, but if we could get it even lower, that would be great.
Rachel, this is Christine, and I will say from a standpoint as a female-owned business that I completely agree with you.
I agree with you too, Rachel.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I would, if we are willing to consider tweaking it a little bit, because there's less work involved in those last two criteria, maybe taking 5 points from each of them, making them 5, the minority and project cost, and then making readiness to proceed, maybe rounding that up to 20, since there's more proof involved with that, more work.
Yeah.
Mr. Mayor.
I'm good with that.
I am too. I think that is a good idea, Carolyn. Thank you.
When?
Yes, thank you. And I want to say that I believe it should stay the way it is. And my primary reason for that, although I agree that everybody is in great need at this time, the historical reasons for that are enough for me to support that we keep that in. And it's, I have no background for how the situation has been over time in Sierra Vista, but I think historically the need for giving preference to minority and women and low-income owned businesses is important.
Okay, I think we understand your position, Quinn. What I'm going to suggest here is the last two items, the project costs in the low to moderate income business owner there, go to 10, each of them go from 10 to 5. We take that other 10%, 10 points, and move them to the readiness to proceed as was suggested.
I'm in agreement with that.
I agree.
Agree with that, Mayor. This is
Any other comments? Okay, I'm going to assume consensus, and I'd ask Tony if you just take a note to that effect on this chart. So it'd be readiness to proceed would be 20, and the bottom two would be 5 points each.
Roger, Mr. Mayor, we've made the change.
Thank you. And thank you to council.
Give us a second here. We're working on the sound. Go ahead, Chuck.
All right, Mr. Mayor, members of council, a lot of times when we bid out federal grant contracts, we have requirements such as the minority women-owned business requirements, and we do apply scoring systems to those that we know have been vetted by HUD in the past. So I just want to make sure, you know, we can go back and look at how we've scored some of those contracts. And I just want to make sure that we're not scoring certain categories too low, because that might raise a red flag right away with HUD.
Okay, so take what we suggested, take both items we suggested and see if both of them apply. And then we'll make that decision.
Yeah, we'll let you know. We'll let you know if there's a significant difference.
Let us know ahead of time, and on the 12th, if we need to change, we'll change.
Okay.
Thank you.
So we're all confused now. Tony, you go ahead.
I'm good, Mr. Mayor. So the HUD rep has seen this. I will send them the new copy for their review. Per the city manager's guidance there. So, all right, the next two slides really are straight out of the federal regulation. I just wanted to kind of put that in front of everybody so people can see really the bulk and really the intent goes back to the basic operating capital for leasing, insurance, utilities, and staff salaries. There are other elements that are authorized and allowed, such as equipment purchase and perhaps even marketing or advertising, which may sound different, but as we think about the businesses reopening in this time from June, again, those are eligible uses kind of as we go. So if any questions, we'll go to the next slide, which highlights in true federal fashion the things that are ineligible to be utilized. I will note, if you dig through 24 CFR 570, there are construction fees authorized up to $2,000. We did not want to get into NEPA and construction, so we, the staff, took that out. So I don't want you going back to the regulation and saying, boom, they do authorize it. But we did make a decision specifically on the construction fees at the bottom. But the rest comes straight out of 24 CFR 570. All right, next slide, please. Mr. Mayor and Council, this again was kind of just taking where we were at and really the discussions of how slow perhaps HUD was going to make it through. We can address the timeline and move it to the left. The real intent after this work session, it's going to take us 2 days or so to adjust all of the applications and the summaries, as well as bounce kind of the new data off of HUD. Then the intent was to go into a pre-advertising of the grant. I've talked to Judy about getting a flyer out on the website, as well as getting it into the Chambers of Commerce, the SBDC, EDF, and those things so they can see it. Moving forward to a council, mayor and council vote as we move forward. And then we would go live on the application certification for 2 weeks. Again, with the intent to be closed on the 29th, we'll move that to the left. We've got 4 days for review and scoring. My intent would be to go faster if we can, because again, the intent is to get the money into the business hands, make the estimated awards. Again, Matt's working with them to get the actual funding on the other side. And then for 6 months, and again, this part does not apply to the micro enterprises, but it will apply to those with the special economic development. They will need to come back in the future, and it's been recommended to use 6 months, that they did in fact self-certify that they've maintained those businesses. That will allow Matt to close that grant out, and the business will not owe that money into the future. So so the micro enterprises, we can turn relatively quick and meet the requirements and close the grant down. The special economic development ones will have a time into the future. And again, it was recommended 6 months to give them time to recover and really ramp up their operations into the future.
Questions?
Mr. Mayor, Christine, I just
We'll
have a
go-
clarification.
We'll go with Christine.
Thank you, sir. This should be very quick. Tony, you said businesses verification, but I think that was a misspeak, and what you meant was positions. Isn't that correct? For the 12th of December, you're
Correct.
They have business positions, yeah.
I was using,
this
yes,
correct?
self-certification, the business on the front end, but yes, you're correct.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, ma'am.
for Tony, in your best judgment, will it take 2 weeks to complete the application?
Councilmember Calhoun, we think, looking at the application, that most business owners, especially the sole proprietors, should be able to complete it in under 90 minutes. The external elements will be a copy of their 1040 redacted and payroll. So no, I don't think so. We've tried to make it as simple as we can while maintaining enough information to justify the businesses that we spend the money on when HUD comes back and looks at us, in this next term. So
you feel the 2 weeks is, I was just thinking less than 2 weeks would move it along a little faster.
we could do that. I mean, if the consensus is to close it down in a week.
Well, here's the issue. They're gonna want some time to do this. And some businesses will be ready tomorrow. And others will have to get paperwork together and have to get identify employees and look at their actual income to see which one they qualify for. So it may take them more than a week just to get the information. It takes them 90 minutes to fill it out properly, but to be able to get the documentation and then get it turned in, it may take them a week. But in my mind, that's their time, not our time. And we're not slowing it down by giving them adequate time to respond and file the application. I don't think.
One additional question.
Please.
In December, we don't get the appropriate response from the businesses or no response at all. Are we prepared to deal with that in any particular way?
Yeah, we're going to have any council members that voted on this that'll be out of office. We're going to send them over to, twist their arms. No, but we have to have a system where we're notified 30 days or 60 days. Hey, here's your friendly reminder. 30 days from now, this is going to be due. And so we have to set up a program to be able to do that. And of course, that we can encourage them to file earlier too, if they're able.
Thank you.
There's got to be a follow-up program. Glenn, you're absolutely right. Any other questions?
Mr. Mayor, this is Christine again, and I apologize. I have another question that made me think when Gwen was speaking. Tony, when we keep talking about the 1090X, I assume we're speaking about the most recent, because I know there are a lot of people that haven't filed their 19 taxes yet, and at that point would go back to 18. Does that matter if it's the 18 or 19 taxes?
Councilmember Wolf, no, we can use 18. Because again, the government's extended the tax submission to the right. So no, we can base this off of the 2018 returns.
I just wanted to make sure, because I'm one of those losers that haven't filed my taxes yet.
No, you're not a loser.
All losers, Christine.
I got to send them money, so I haven't filed mine yet either. But
that would be appropriate. That's all.
The key thing there is the tax. The last time it was completed, whether that's a 19 or an 18, doesn't make a difference as long as it's a complete form. That's the key.
Thank you,
Mr. Mayor.
Ma'am.
This is Sarah. Question on same lines, I guess, is that are we asking the business owners to produce like the 1040 of their employees to certify their employees' income level? Because if that's not their only job, then, I don't know how they certify their own employees' income level other than what they get paid at that one job, but they may have multiple. And then also if it's, persons in your family, so then they'd have to, I guess that doesn't sit right with me, but can you explain that process?
Well, Council Member Pacheco, there are two things. One, the business owner will provide the payroll. That provides the baseline for the income. And the second part is they're going to have to self-certify the number of family members or dependents for that individual. So we're not asking for the individual employee 1040s. And in fact, in the applications, we're not even asking for full names. So again, there is a bit of self-certification, but we want to have enough documentation to be able to show where the money went, which business, how they spent it.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, ma'am.
an additional question. Don't mean to be negative, but is there a plan B in case there's a problem with the internet system or whatever you call doing this by the internet?
Tony?
Well, Councilmember Calhoun, we can go, I mean, we tried to build it without, the 1040s could be hand delivered to City Hall as another security measure. What we didn't want is even their redacted 1040s in the email. So we've tested out the link and we're going to continue to test that as we roll it so that the businesses can upload their own documents into their own folder. But yes, we do as a backup, just a traditional hard copy version of their application.
Okay, I think that's really important just to avoid any delay in the timing.
Well, and Councilmember Calhoun, that's the important part of us knowing who's submitting the packet so we can track them. So as they reach out to us, we set the link to their folder. We'll be able to watch and call. So if we've got 20 interested folks, we'll be able to watch their progress kind of as we go along.
I see. It's like magic.
Well, the other advantage that gives us is if they've filed part of it, it's incomplete, and we're getting to the point where it's now time to review and score these things. Tony and his guys Tony and Matt can get on the horn and say, hey, I still need this document or that document, otherwise I can't evaluate your request.
But there is a drop dead date and time for applications.
Councilmember Calhoun, yes.
29 May is what the chart says.
Yes. Okay.
But Mr. Mayor, I think we'll move that to the left based on the earlier adjustment.
Yeah, well, yeah, we can, yeah, okay. We just need to decide what it is so we can get it printed and post it to folks. Okay, any other questions on Tony's portion of the briefing?
What,
Ma'am?
sorry, Mr. Mayor, one more. Is there a plan to reach out to businesses just to make sure we're getting the news about this available grant to as many of the business owners as possible?
Tony, would you speak to that, please?
Yeah, yes, Mr. Mayor. Councilmember Humphrey, yes, the intent is to use our social media. Perhaps the Herald will also, again, I've been keeping both chambers of commerce involved in this, as well as the SBDC and the regional EDF. So if there's another organization, but yes, so use those lines to their customers and businesses that they talk to, public media, social media. And as soon as we can get this application adjusted and fixed, that's the pre-advertising. The intent was to advertise this forward, the basic lines of the grant. When would the grant be open? And again, that goes back to your approval and how long. And so we're trying to get those things up front so we get and reach to all of the businesses that we can.
Okay, thank you, Tony.
Anything else from Mr. Boone? Okay, thank you, Tony. I guess we're now headed to the Grumbacher Assistance Program.
Okay, if we could go ahead and scroll forward. Thanks. Okay, so as I said at the top, we're staying with our recommendation to earmark a portion of the CARES Act funding to the United Way's GAP program, Emergency Crisis Fund. Provided with the agenda backup material is the draft subrecipient agreement. Follows our standard format for public service contracts. Nathan has reviewed and approved the draft. A few points to consider with this arrangement. First, we like United Way because the Groundblocker Assistance Program is already stood up and operating in a manner that fits with the intent of the CARES Act funding to meet urgent needs in the community. I think it's an important point that the United Way provides a central point of contact for nonprofits who need funding for specific client services. They have pre-existing relationships with the local nonprofit community and already receive referrals for clients in need. Baseline target is assisting at least 30 individuals through this fund. As discussed at the last work session, the United Way has offered to limit indirect expenses to 5% of the grant or $3,000, which is written into the subrecipient agreement. The remainder will go towards payments directly to the service providers on behalf of the individual or family receiving assistance. For example, if somebody needs a catch-up payment on utilities, the check will go to the utility provider, not the individual, to ensure funds are being used for the intended purpose. We're getting a little back here. Go on to the next slide, please.
Before you go, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Groundblocker Assistance Program. This would be an individual could go to them and say, hey, I have this need, or, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Matt, if, for example, the folks at the homeless shelter, the Good Neighbor Alliance, were at capacity and needed to put people up at a hotel motel, they could also ask for assistance, and they don't necessarily have to be a member of the United Way to do that. Is that correct?
That is correct. Typically, the referrals come from or through the area nonprofits. So if the Good Neighbor Alliance shelter, Samaritan Station maxes out in capacity, or an individual needs to be quarantined, they can use this source of funding to cover a hotel or motel voucher.
Roger.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor,
Ma'am.
I don't know how United Way handles their voucher system, but I'm curious about the mental health counseling and would wonder if community, let me say, individual counselors who are not with an agency wanted to do some counseling, could they step forward and get on a list, and then the Grumbacher Fund could give them vouchers to see a certain number of people? I don't know how they'd handle all that, but
Miss Gwen, it's done the same way as individual that's in the Forgash house, for instance. The voucher will go to the counselor that they're going to seek, or the organization that's helped them find counseling, like Easter Seals or another organization that does behavioral health.
William, I get that, but I'm thinking about counselors who are not with an agency who could be of assistance, because we do have a shortage of counselors in the community. And if there should be an influx, which NAMI expects there will be, an influx of people requiring or desiring counseling, we need a way to be able to handle as many and as soon as possible.
Yes, ma'am. They do it the exact same way. If it's an independent counselor, they'll find out, basically they're giving the grant or the award to the individual, but they're going to pay the counselor that they're going to see to ensure that the money's going to the counselor.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, ma'am.
this is Sarah. On that topic, Gwen, I mean, the first slide says assisting individuals without shelter or impacted by COVID-19. Like this is an emergency crisis fund. I don't know. Is that what the fund is for? I mean, assisting with counseling doesn't seem like it fits in this category, or is it even made available in that way?
Well, there are individuals and families that are,
Can I
experiencing mental health concerns relative to the pandemic, and that is a eligible expense under this fund.
Mr. Mayor,
William.
just to touch on what Sarah said, there's individuals that weren't homeless or needed shelter prior to this, and now they might be. So one of the big things that the garbage fund is trying to do is eliminate that and find them help before they take that to the next level or get to the next level where it turns they're not homeless, there's something else. So they do provide funds for that, and they do look into that along with several other organizations. If that makes sense.
It
Sarah?
just feels like we're really broadening the use. This isn't a lot of funding.
I agree.
We're really broadening it to just be anything. I feel like it should be honed in a little bit on what our target is with how this money is being used. And when you open that Pandora's box of we're going to address mental health too, I mean, that's
Well, I don't, Sarah, I don't look
that's
at it.
ongoing need, you know, but
Sarah, I look at it like this, and forgive me if I'm making this too simple. But basically, we're assisting community members who may have been impacted by the virus and individuals without shelter. Now, how are you impacted? We're pretty clear on how people are impacted without shelter, but other people are also impacted by COVID. It could be mental health issues. It could be utilities. It could be a number. It could be a number of other things that need assistance. But that's part of the mission, the way I understand it. Now, we're going to be able to spend lavish amounts on mental health? Obviously not, because we don't have lavish amounts of money.
Mr. Mayor,
Yeah.
is this a separate vote from the first one?
It's all one program, and we're going to talk about whether we're going to do this one and the next one, or if the money is going to be split up. We'll talk about that when we get done with the briefing.
The problem I have, Mr. Mayor, and I'll put it out now so I don't want to say too much more. I'm the vice president of United Way. So if it's the same vote, I don't want to put out and try to have people choose the United Way because I am a vice president, so I have a conflict of interest.
Well,
Mr. Mayor,
I would suggest you sit down and talk with the attorney, because I don't necessarily see a conflict of interest unless you're actually a signatory on the contract. But again, you need to sit down with the attorney, so you may have to recuse yourself.
Roger.
Okay. Any other discussion on this slide?
Mr. Mayor, this is Christine, if I may.
Sure.
I just want to kind of address both Gwen and Sarah's comments. And I have to say that I really agree with Gwen. One of the biggest things that has been happening is it is a mental health issue. And if you look at everything, mental health issues are on the rise. And I 100% do not have any problems with putting some money towards that, whatever we can. And I know it's not that much money, but this has affected a lot of people. I think it's for me to say how it's affected you and what you need as far as mental health goes. I think that is just as an important part of your health as well-being.
I think that's a good point. The other thing we got to realize is mental health usually, or care for mental health, is usually a process. And this really is only going to be enough money to get them in the door. And we're not going to be able to complete the entire medical treatment or counseling or whatever may be required.
And I understand that, Mr. Mayor. I think sometimes, again, this is really hitting a lot of people hard, and anything is sometimes better than nothing. I just don't want to not give money to that area if we can do anything to help somebody.
Okay, and we'll have that discussion here in a minute. We want to get Matt to finish with his presentation. Matt.
Okay, please proceed to the next slide. And maybe this will alleviate some of the concern on how we're focusing the proposed funding. Staff took a stab at putting together a budget that covers the anticipated needs through the end of the year. The line items under the GAP fund can be adjusted from the budget amount by up to 25% based on service level demands. Adjustments beyond that threshold require city authorization. As you can see, the bulk of the budget is tentatively slated towards helping low-income families stay in their homes through subsidies to rent or mortgage payments or utilities. After speaking with the executive director this afternoon, it's my recommendation that within these categories, we cap the individual beneficiary amount to $1,000. If you agree that that amount is reasonable, we'll add this as a provision to the contract. Again, the $3,000 for indirect administrative cost is fixed, which is a pretty generous offer by United Way and much lower than what our cost would be if we tried to self-administer. I'll pause there, give you a chance to look through those line items. Again, this is just a springboard for discussion, and the actual budgets will fluctuate depending on the demands over the course of the upcoming months.
Mayor,
Yes, ma'am.
thank you. Matt, so earlier it was up to 5%, and this slide says fixed 3,000. So which is it? Can you clarify that for me?
It is 5%.
Well, yeah, we're just capping the total for administration at $3,000, which is 5% of, roughly 5% of the allocation.
Okay, so if we were to change it to say another number, it would be 5% of the new number.
If the United Way, that was their
Yes.
offer is 5%. So
Yes, if it's agreeable to United Way.
Okay, well, I'm just confused because it says fixed, which says 3,000, but then earlier it said
What's fixed?
5% up to 3,000.
What's fixed is it's 5%. It is 5% up to $3,000. A cap.
Okay, so
3,000 would be a cap. So if we decide today we're only going to spend 30 instead of under 60 on this part, then it would still be 5% of 30.
okay, that's what I wanted to make sure I was understanding correctly. Thank you, Mayor and Matt.
And the point I wanted to communicate with that quotation is, the note below the chart on, the ability to adjust the line items only pertains to the gap fund. So those line items could go up or down, go up to a maximum of 25%. Anything over that would be subject to city prior authorization from the city. And then, of course, the overall grant amount will not exceed the $59,897.
Okay. And Matt, did I hear you say you're thinking a good idea is to cap it at, did I hear you say $1,000 per person?
That's our recommendation at this time.
1,000.
1,000.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure I heard you correctly. Thank you.
And that was a recommendation that was, as far as I'm concerned, was made on the fly, Matt.
Well, we got to start somewhere. So that's
Yeah, that's why you come talk to the mayor when you get those bright ideas.
okay. Well, and it was based on the feedback from the executive director of United Way. Typically, what do people receive through the current GAP program? And
the current GAP program would be less than $1,000. I understand that, and that's what they're used to dealing with, and it's probably a good guideline. But those are the kind of things I would appreciate having been shared with me before we had the meeting. The other thing that's key to remember here for the staff and the council is that this sets up so we're not writing a check or giving cash to an individual. We're actually giving it to the shelter, the mental counseling, the hotels, motels, etc. And those folks will then be able to provide a receipt so we can track the funding that is spent. Where if we try to do that with individuals, we would have big time problems reconciling with the federal government, and we don't want those problems. Take my word for it. Any other questions on this slide?
okay, moving on. The schedule for this contract takes us through the end of the year. Like the budget, the expenditure schedule could be adjusted by up to 50% depending on service demands, which are difficult to gauge at this time. We will help the United Way to get word out once the funding is set to make sure the community is aware of this program. Next slide.
Matt, before you go back a slide, please. I just want to share with the council, Matt and I did have a discussion on this one. And obviously, we're not going to, if people apply and have needs before the end of July, we could certainly spend the money by that. We're not going to wait just because of this chart and not spend the preponderance of the money later in the year if there's a valid need early. The whole idea is to get the money out to the people that are in need as soon as possible.
That is correct. It's just to require United Way to consult us before going
Above those items.
above those, yeah,
Yeah.
more than 50% above those, the payment schedule.
Yep. And we can authorize them to do that.
Right.
Okay.
Okay, so in terms of the nonprofits that you asked me to research regarding their COVID-19 response programs, the Legacy Foundation started providing emergency funding assistance to area nonprofits in mid-March. And you can find the list of grantees on their website. As you can imagine, particularly with the donation-driven nonprofits, they are struggling to keep up with their ongoing operating expenses. The emergency grants are helping them maintain or even augment service levels to keep them up with the heightened demands. Mrs. Hepburn agreed that the GAP program would be a good vehicle to address specific individual needs of those in dire straits. The Community Foundation for Southern Arizona has also set up a COVID-19 emergency relief fund. Theirs is to support nonprofits that have had to cancel critical fundraiser events. They are currently restricting funding to nonprofits in Pima and Santa Cruz counties only. Then next slide, with the Arizona Community Foundation, which is based in Phoenix. They have a community response fund for general operations directly related to changes in service delivery resulting from COVID-19 in Arizona. Grant funding may not be used to develop or implement new services not in place prior to March 11th. Again, this fund is to aid nonprofits with their operating expenses. Available funding is based on donations received within Cochise County, which is not being disclosed. So in conclusion, pending any changes with the council wants to make, we'll be posting the final proposed amendments to our website for the 5-day public comment period that starts tomorrow and runs through the close of business next Monday, May 11th. This item will return to you at your regular meeting, and we're going to go now with May 12th with any comments that we receive during that time frame. At this time, we'll welcome any additional feedback and direction you wish to provide.
Okay, Matt, thank you. We got some discussion to do. The first question for the council to discuss is, do we want to split between the small business grant and the GAP program? We want to split between the two as presented.
I thought Mr. Mayor, this is William. I thought we were going with the 100,000 for the small business and the 60.
When we had our last meeting, I asked for consensus of council that we would do that as the straw man.
Okay, tracking.
So it was developed, and we did do that. The staff did do that for us.
Mr. Mayor,
I promised further discussion on this item if, in fact, council wanted to discuss it and change the ratios. Yes, ma'am, Ms. Humphrey.
yeah, I do. I remember you saying it that way, and I was thinking with what Tony had said. And by the way, Tony and Matt, thank you for all your hard work in putting this together. Tony mentioned a couple times that the community lacrosse didn't have enough money for the businesses. And I'm wondering if, looking at our numbers, if we might run into that same problem. And I think about individuals, a lot of them are going to be getting stimulus checks, hopefully. And I think it might be doing more good if we can maybe give 20,000 more to the business side, something like that, and save 2 or 4 more jobs, 2 or 4 more businesses to keep people from even getting into that situation where they'll need help on the other end. I don't know. I'm putting that out there for council to think about.
And I would say that's worth discussion. However, I would also say that there are people that will be in the GAP as well. and that aren't going to be getting the refunds or whatever else that they've applied for, or then that don't get other federal assistance. So we need to keep that in mind too. Who else?
There's also, and I think that's where you talk with Mr. Mayor's talking about in the gap. There's those that don't get the stimulus because they made too much money, but due to the COVID-19, they don't have a job. So now they're in dire needs because they don't have that money coming in. So where do we help that individual out if we don't make it more for an individual also?
Right, which is why I wouldn't suggest that we completely not use serve the individual. I'm just thinking if we could save more jobs in the community, that might be doing more good on the other end of things if they
I agree.
keep their jobs.
And this is where we get into the Solomon type decision as to how do we cut the baby up. But who was it? Rachel?
It was Rachel. Mayor, I agree with Carolyn here. I think this was discussed just a little bit last week, and I heard some other members agree with this, but I think that taking an additional 20,000 and making the business end 120, it makes sense to me for all the reasons that Carolyn just outlined.
Okay, anybody else?
Mr. Mayor, I agree. I think a lot of, especially the small businesses, are having a really hard time right now. And like Carolyn said, if you get the small business, then they can employ people. And I think she made a really valid point saying that if the small businesses can continue to employ people, that we can help on the back end, if we can sort of stop the flow on the front end. And I do agree that we still need to give money in the GAP fund. I 100% agree with that. But let's do what we can with the very small amount of funds that we have.
We don't have much. Gwen?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm really torn on this too. And I think the cutting of the baby is a really vivid way of looking at this. However, I think our agencies, Legacy, the Arizona Community Foundation, not the middle one, because they don't fund anything in this area, the Southern Arizona Community Foundation. I think those agencies that maybe we could direct people, if it's not already evident, to those the different agencies that help people in trouble. And I have to add, SEGO is one of those agencies, and St. Vincent de Paul, that truly do help people with vouchers for various needs, even though they're also hurting now, but they are requesting money from the big foundations.
Yep.
So I agree with Carolyn that I would probably even move more of that money towards businesses and not to individuals.
Okay, Sarah, you have comments?
I'm in agreement as well.
Okay. So what I'm hearing on a consensus of council, and you guys tell me if I'm wrong before I give direction to staff. We're talking about going from the $59,897 down 20,000, so it'll be 39,897, and the 20,000 would go into 120,000 for the other program. And that's am I on base there?
Or even a little, I would even say a little more.
No, I think that's a consensus. I know we can argue this all night, but I think that's the consensus right now, and that's the guidance I'll give to the staff to put in the next proposal, so that when that'll come to the table for further discussion when we vote on it. Okay. Matt, what did we leave out that we need to give you guidance on?
With the reduced amount, are there any services you want to cut back on or reallocate?
No.
Okay.
We're just talking the amounts.
Okay. So just proportional reduction.
Right. Proportional reduction.
Okay.
Exactly.
Got it.
Anything else that, from your perspective, that we need to talk about?
No, that's sufficient guidance for us to proceed with the posting of the draft.
Tony, do you need any additional guidance?
No, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Bertucci, do you have any guidance or need any guidance?
No, Mr. Mayor, I think we have everything we need from the council.
Any last comments from the council members?
I have a question, Mr. Mayor. With our special meeting following the work session, will we then not have a meeting at all on the 14th? Will we be doing everything we would have normally done?
We will have a meeting on the 14th. This will be a one-item special meeting because
Okay.
on the 14th is when we're gonna, I'm told again now that we will be doing the Fry comments and the briefing on the Fry improvements. So that'll be a big item on there. I'm not sure what else is on the schedule, but I'm sure you'll see something very shortly.
Budget and the fry.
The budget also will be briefed. Any other comments or questions from council members?
Just to say thank you very much to Tony and Matt for their hard work on this. I know that this isn't fun having to rush this through, and they've thought very quickly and utilized resources very quickly, and I appreciate the work they've done on this.
And I would add that they've done a great job, but they still got significant amount of work to do. The key thing is being able to define this clearly to the applicants, the separate process that is simple and quick, and something that we can respond quickly as the federal government will allow us to do. So we can do what we're elected to do, which is take care of our folks. Okay. Seeing no other comments, I would remind you that don't drink too much tequila tonight, since you'll be out there celebrating Cinco de Mayo. The other thing I need to do formally here is we've had our session here. This is a public hearing item. I need to ask the clerk, are there any people that would like to address us from the public?
Mr. Mayor, I have no request to address the council.
So I'll close this meeting to the public. And with that, I see nothing else on the agenda. Thank you all for your participation and good discussion and the good hard work of the staff. Meeting's adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.